What is going on, traders? We got a lot to talk about. Let's get straight into it. You're not going to want to miss this. So, we talked about this move possibly happening. We talked about this in the last video and even the video before, where we had this bearish engulfing candle form on the SPY, the triple Qs, the ES, and NQ. And one thing I mentioned was that even though you have these bearish patterns forming, it doesn't necessarily mean they have to play out right away. And we saw that happen yesterday where we had this bearish engulfing candle, and then yesterday we ended up seeing more upside instead of more downside. And then today we somewhat gapped up because of TSM earnings, and then eventually bulls ended up losing control, and then we saw the bears take back over. A perfect example of how bearish engulfing candles don't have to play out right away is right here. You have a bearish engulfing candle, but then you consolidate it, and then eventually you broke down. And so I don't necessarily think we're going to be doing much consolidating from this point. I definitely think we're going to start seeing a breakdown between tomorrow and early next week. And right now, the key levels that I am looking at, if we give up 580, is 575. I think that's going to be our first stop, if any. Now, if you've been following this channel for quite some time, then you know that I always talk about rolling back into patterns. And that is exactly what we're looking at here. We broke out, we broke back down, we tried to break out again for the second time. Bears took control all over again, and now we're back in this rising wedge. So this only leads me to believe that we're going to start heading to the bottom of this rising wedge. We've seen this happen countless times. Every time we break out of a pattern, I show you guys when we roll back into that pattern, usually you're going to continue in that direction. And so right now, I genuinely believe that we're going to start heading towards 575. But first, we want to see 580 be broken. Okay, until 580 is broken, we're still somewhat bullish. Maybe we just consolidate for a bit, but otherwise, if that does happen, if we just so happen to break 580, then I'm definitely looking at this level right here, which is this horizontal yellow line, and we could be heading here, which is 575. Now, one key thing that can happen if we just so happen to head towards 575 is that we could see a further breakdown, right? If we head towards 575 straight from this point, we're pretty much outside of this rising wedge. And then we got to start talking about the measured move and exactly where we're heading from here, right? So if we do break towards 575 and break below this rising wedge, then we can be heading much lower than 575. But it hasn't happened yet. The rising wedge is not yet confirmed, but this is something to pay attention to. And the fact that we have lost control once again, or the bulls have lost control once again in regards to breaking higher, just shows that there is a lot more potential for a breakdown. Again, we saw these bearish engulfing candles form. That was our first signal that we could be looking at some downside in the near future. And then the next day, we saw that we had this bullish candle. We started to head towards the upside. We saw it again because of TSM earnings, and then maybe Netflix earning played a little bit of part. I don't think so. It seemed like TSM earnings was really the big deal today. And now we're looking at the bears pretty much pushing us back down all over again. And so we look at the triple Qs, daily time frame. And again, same exact thing. We're seeing this rising wedge here. We rejected here, we rejected here, we rejected here. We rejected this daily supply and demand zone, which we ended up forming back here. We had this bullish candle, we had a bearish engulfing candle. And this is another example on how just because you see a bearish engulfing candle or even a bearish pattern in general doesn't necessarily mean it has to play out right away. But eventually it does end up playing out. And so we saw that. We saw this bearish engulfing candle right here, and then we started to head higher. We retested the daily supply and demand zone, which confirms that this is a supply and demand zone. And then look what happened. We gapped down and we started to break down tremendously. And so we could be looking at the same scenario here. Look what happened here. We hit the supply and demand zone that we formed all the way back here, right? And then we had this bearish engulfing candle. We had this doji pattern, which shows that, the market was indecisive on what direction we're trying to go here. We gapped up and then we pretty much rejected this area all over again. Bears are back in control all over again. And so right now we could be looking at a move towards 485, 480. Now, my first target is 485. If we give up 490, I definitely think that is an actual reasonable target. And if I had to put money on it, I would assume that we're going to start, at least filling one or two of these gaps towards the downside. You have a gap right here, and then you have another gap down here. And then there is a fair value gap in this area as well. I just don't have it up right now, but there are fair value gaps towards the downside between about 480 and 485. I could be wrong on that, but there's definitely some down here somewhere. Okay, so I want you guys to keep that in mind. Now, if we do head towards 485, it is important to note that we will still be somewhat in this rising wedge pattern. And so, in order for us to really break out of this rising wedge pattern, we will have to start heading towards this gap fill and heading towards 480, which I do think is very much possible. But we'll have to wait and see. Again, even though this rising wedge pattern is forming, it doesn't mean it's yet confirmed. It's only confirmed, or patterns are only confirmed when you break out of them to the downside. And it really depends on how big the breakout is. So we'll see. Okay. But otherwise, things are not looking good. Again, bearish engulfing candle showed that bears are trying to push things down. Next day, bulls and bears pretty much fought it out. Bulls was winning for the day, and then bears took over all over again. So I definitely think this is a sign for more downside. Now, we look at the NQ. We're just going to run through the NQ real quick and the ES. You're pretty much looking at the same scenario here, just in case you guys, don't look at the NQs. I always recommend to look at the futures and the ES to make sure things correlate. And this is how you end up catching bull traps and bear traps and things like that. And I show a perfect example on how the SPY was pretty much trapping bulls to the upside when it was breaking above that rising wedge. But right here, we were still within the rising wedge on the ES and the NQ as well. And so we're seeing the same pattern form again, all over again. And you're looking back here, you see bearish engulfing candle, you pretty much formed the supply and demand zone, you retested the supply and demand zone, you broke down. You're looking at the same scenario here. Bearish engulfing candle. Now we can easily maybe head up tomorrow. That is possible. I don't really think that's going to be the case, and I'll show you guys why. But it's very much possible we do one of these moves, maybe form some type of double top, and then sometime next week, that's when we start seeing the real breakdown come in. Very much possible. Okay, I will say that much. It is possible that we can see that move happening, right? But right now, if we're looking at everything else, which we'll get into in a bit, it looks like we're going to see absolute downside. We'll see. We do have news tomorrow, but we look at the ES. We're still holding this trend on the ES. I will say that much, right? But we're seeing, we zoom in, but one thing we're seeing is that bulls are getting very weak. They're getting weaker and weaker at the further along we go. And so it's only a matter of time if this continues to happen where we see bulls, I mean, not bulls, well, yeah, bulls actually give up here and we start to break down. This is also somewhat of a dark cloud cover. It's not perfect. It's supposed to cover 50% of the candle. This is like 75% or 80% of the candle, but still, you can consider this a bearish pattern. If you don't, that's fine. But as you guys can see, bulls are just really getting weak here, and we can be looking at some downside sometime tomorrow or even heading into next week. And so we look at Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin is still holding up pretty strong here. I will say that much. I don't have anything bad to say about Bitcoin, but what I will say about Bitcoin is that if it holds here, okay, if it continues to hold this level right here, or the supply and demand zone right here, there's a very, very strong possibility of this thing heading back to previous highs. Right now, if we stay here, okay, if we stay here, I want you guys to keep this in mind because some of you guys just run with whatever I say, right? If we stay here above the supply and demand zone, above 67K, okay, 67K, we'll say 66. 1,800 uh, as a much more safe target. As long as we stay above those ranges, I definitely think Bitcoin can start heading towards at least minimum 71, 72K. Okay. That is what I'm looking at. But if we start to break down, and I mean like really break down, if we see one of these moves happen where we break below at least, I would say 65K, then chances are we're heading back to the low 60s. Okay. So that's something to pay attention to in regards to Bitcoin. But we had this clean double bottom here. We broke the neckline. And if we're talking about the measured move here from the neckline to the bottom of the double bottom, I should say, you will be looking at a measured move to about 72K. So yeah, that's pretty much my target if we stay above this area. All right. Now we can break down and come back up, but until that happens, I still have a target of 72K right now in regards to Bitcoin. But if we break down, then I imagine we're going to recover, and then we're probably going to try all over again in the near future. We'll see. But something to pay attention to. I think Bitcoin looks very strong here. And if we're talking about Bitcoin being a leading indicator right now, we could say that tomorrow may be bullish, but I do think a drop is coming. Okay. So just want you guys to keep that in mind. Now, another interesting thing here is the VIX. Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. Okay, the VIX, and so we talked about this in our last video on how the VIX, and it's crazy because you'll have traders out there tell you you can't plot the VIX, but look what's happening. The VIX is respecting the breakdown of this broadening wedge, and look what happened. I told you guys that the fact that the VIX is breaking below this shows that there is a bullish indication, or a bullish sign on the market possibly going higher. And so, if we are talking about a drop happening, I do imagine that the VIX is just going to do one of these moves where it simply retest about 20, 20, 21, somewhere around there, and then we see a further breakdown. All right. So, I don't think this move is done. Okay. I do have a price target. I even said this in the Discord. The VIX looks like it's going to head towards 18. I still think that's going to happen. But whales have a much better target for the VIX, and I say better if you're bullish. If you're bearish, then this might be bad news for you. Okay, so we look at our Discord, and we look at the bot in the Discord, and we have a whale has taken a VIX call, a 16, not a call, a put, a VIX put for 16 strike for November 20th. All right, 61% AI confidence, premium 388K, and then you have your volume and open interest. So this is very, very interesting. And again, look what happened here. We broke below this broadening wedge, and I showed you guys this yesterday. And then you have this alert come in showing that some whale, some hedge fund, whoever is taking a trade on the VIX and they're doing puts for a 16 strike. That's extremely bullish for the market. So I don't think the upside is over. It's just a matter on of how it's going to play out. Is what's kind of throwing me for a loop here. Okay, how the upside is going to play out. And so if we are looking at a drop, and we're going to get into the semiconductors and just really confirm that there is a possibility for a drop, right? But if we are looking at a drop, I imagine that the VIX is just going to take that opportunity in regards to the drop to retest about the 20, 21, somewhere around there. And then we start to break further down on the VIX. And right now, my short term target is 18, but clearly, some whale, some hedge fund out there has a much bigger target for the VIX. So if you want access to information like this or trades like this, and you want to follow these types of trades, join the Discord. Discord link is in the description below. A lot of trades have came in today. A lot of whales are trading today. They're trading calls, they're trading puts, and yeah, very high success rate on the AI bots. They don't just alert random things; they alert what the whales are trading. Okay, so if you want access to this, Discord link is in the description below. But I just thought I'd show you guys the at least the VIX puts. Very interesting. 16 strike is a pretty major move for the market in regards to upside. So we'll see. Now let's talk about the semiconductor ETFs. And so we look at SMH, right? And this is what I was talking about. And so this is what I was talking about in our last video. I was talking about for quite some time, right? Where we have this bearish engulfing candle form, right? And what happened here, we're just going to get rid of this trend line real quick. So we can just focus on this whole area right here. And so we had us an ascending triangle. Everything was looking great. Okay. We're on the 4 hour time frame, by the way. Everything was looking great. And we broke out, and then the ASML news came in about their earnings leak and all that fun stuff, and we broke completely down. And what do I tell you guys? When you break back into a pattern, when you roll back into a pattern, whether it's to the upside, to the downside, typically you're going to continue in that direction. And now we're seeing that happening. And so it's clear that SMH, the fact that we broke back into this ascending triangle, which is pretty much invalidated, but we're just going to call it an ascending triangle just because it's there. But the fact that we broke back into it and then broke back below it is a clear sign that we're going to see more downside. I mean, if we do, I find it hard to believe that we're just going to do this again, just break back in here again. That would be, I wouldn't even know at that point. Okay. I, I would not know what's going on at that point for us to do that all over again. So bears are showing that they want to push us further down. This is an evening star pattern, by the way. Very, very strong bearish pattern. So it's clear that if anything, we're going to start heading towards this gap fill at around 247, 248. So nothing too crazy, I will say. Once we get here, I don't think we're just going to break through this area right here. This is a lot of turbulence, okay? A lot of turbulence right here. So I, I do. I mean, we do have news tomorrow that it is possible for us to break further down here. But and if we do, just so happen to break through these guys, and let's like go lower, then my price target for SMH will be 235. Okay, but until we get there, I just don't see any more downside. I think we're just going to fill this gap and then we'll have to see what happens from there. But the fact that we're below this ascending triangle obviously screams that more downside is very much possible here. So, if anything, I would pay attention to the VIX. If you're going to pay attention to anything, pay attention to what the VIX does. So yeah, that's what I have for SMH. This gap fill, I think it's going to start getting filled tomorrow, between tomorrow and Monday, and then we'll have to see what happens from there. A lot of turbulence here, so I imagine news is going to have to come in for us to really start breaking down. Let's go to the daily time frame, make sure I'm not missing anything. And so yeah, I mean you see it on the daily time frame. Bearish engulfing candle. We talked about this before as well. Bearish engulfing candle just breaking completely down, destroying this whole pattern. I mean, look here. You had strong resistance here. You rejected here, you rejected here, you rejected here. You broke out. And just for us to break out and break back down, that is very, very telling of bearish move. Okay. Just obvious. Okay, I don't even think you guys need to need me to tell you that this is clearly looking for more of a drop at this point. So let's talk about SOXX real quick. And I mean, you're looking at the same thing here with SOXX. It's nothing special that we really need to talk about. But I mean, it just looks bad when you're looking at it across the board. And so, I mean, clear as day, guys, clear as day. You have this ascending triangle. I mean, let's kind of clean this up a little bit so you guys can get a better idea here. But you had this ascending triangle. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. You had this huge supply and demand zone. You rejected here, you rejected here, you rejected here. You broke out, and then you huge bearish engulfing candle. And like I said, just because it's a bearish engulfing candle forms doesn't mean that it has to play out right away. And look what happens. You head back up to the supply and demand zone. You head back to the bottom of the ascending triangle, and just to reject both of them. I mean, if that doesn't scream more downside, I don't know what will. And so right now, if I had to pick a price target, I would say that SOXS can head as low as about 220. Okay. But we'll see. Okay. We will see. And so let's look at Nvidia. And so we talked about this as well. We said that Nvidia has the potential to see 140 one more time. Okay, well, not one more time because I don't think it hit 140 before. But if it did, then I'm wrong. Okay, but regardless, we said that I think Nvidia has the potential. If we do see upside, that Nvidia is going to hit 140, and then after that, it's really up in the air. And then we have this another evening star pattern, which is a very strong bearish pattern, right? Bullish candle, doji, bearish candle, bearish engulfing candle. That is an evening star pattern. And so it looks like we're going to see more downside for Nvidia. And right now I'm looking at about 130, 129. Okay. So I definitely think whatever's going to happen tomorrow, if we get news tomorrow, I definitely think we're going to start seeing that downside trickle in. All right. If we see more upside, then our next target is about 145. Okay, but in order for us to see more upside, we would need to break above at least one. I would say 141.2, 141.1, somewhere. Just basically this resistance right here. If we break above this evening star, that is extremely bullish. Okay, extremely bullish, and then I imagine we're just going to head towards 145. So I'm not really counting on this happening, but if it does, just be prepared for 145 because you guys know that I did have a price target of 145, 150. Right now, just judging off this evening star pattern, just judging on how we're rejecting this area and just judging how we're looking at the other semiconductor ETFs, it seems like we're going to see more downside. And right now, I'm looking at 130. All right. So that is what I am looking at for the market. And then I want to look at one more thing. We want to look at Meta here. I mean, Meta is screaming that it wants to drop. Okay, it's screaming. Okay, you bounced here, you bounced here, you bounced here, you bounced here, and then look what happened. You broke completely down. All right, you broke down, and then you retested. Okay, you retested the trend here, and now you're breaking down again. You have this bearish engulfing candle. Like I said, just because you have a bearish engulfing candle does not mean it has to play out right away. Look what happened. You're starting to see bullish movement. This is the 4-hour time frame, by the way. You're starting to see bullish movement. And now I think at some point soon, Meta is going to head lower. And right now I'm looking at about 265. I'm not 265, 565. Between 565, lowest I'm looking at is about 550 on Meta. But I mean, you can ask for a better setup. I obviously had more confirmation than this, but the other confirmation with this is just how everything else is looking. If you want to take this trade, I would say, pay attention to the VIX, pay attention to NQ, and see how they're moving. But everything looks like it wants to drop right now. Plain and simple, that's the conclusion. Hopefully, you got something out of this. Hopefully, it all makes sense. If it didn't, let me know in the comments below. If you agree, let me know. And if you don't agree, then let me know. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I got something wrong. Feel free to disagree, but be respectful. Okay. Other than that, Discord link is in the description below. And until the next video, traders, have a good one.